Welcome to the sleepy underworld, a place where romance blooms, magic sparkles, and timeless fairy tales are reimagined for the dreamers of today. From heart-stirring romances to spellbinding adventures, every story is a soothing escape into a realm of love, wonder, and charm. So curl up, press play, and let us carry you away to the land of dreams. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. We'd love to know in what part of the world you are watching and what is your favorite tip for a good night's sleep. Thank you for watching and enjoy the video. Love me, and you will rule beside me. Betray me, and you will burn. The silver moonlight spilled across my chamber like liquid mercury, casting long shadows that danced upon stone walls. I traced my fingers over the ancient spellbook before me, its pages yellowed with age and wisdom. Outside my window, the kingdom slept, unaware that their queen kept vigil in the witching hour. They feared me, as they should. I am Selene, the last true witch of Lunaria, and I seized this throne through blood, fire, and raw power. Where once my kind were hunted like animals, now I rule over those who would have burned me. The irony was not lost on me as I closed the spell book and moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. 3 years had passed since I claimed the crown. 3 years of rebuilding a kingdom that had outlawed magic for generations. 3 years of waiting for the inevitable challenge to my rule. That challenge arrived on a storm-swept night when the guards dragged a man before my throne. He wore tattered finery, his wrists bound in iron chains that clinked with each defiant step. "Your Majesty," Captain Thorne announced, forcing the prisoner to his knees. "We found this man attempting to enter the palace grounds. He claims to be Prince Dorian of House Blackwood." My pulse quickened. House Blackwood, the former royal family I had deposed. Most had fled or perished in my uprising, but rumors persisted that the youngest prince had escaped. I leaned forward on my throne, examining him closely. Midnight hair fell in waves around a face sculpted by nobility and hardship. His eyes, the deep blue of twilight skies, met mine without flinching. "Prince Dorian," I said, letting magic dance between my fingertips, a casual reminder of my power. I believed all the Blackwoods had either fled or found their way to early graves. And then, to my astonishment, he laughed. Not the nervous titter of a man facing death, but a genuine rich sound that echoed through my throne room. "Is something amusing you, Prince?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," he replied, his voice like velvet over steel. "I simply find it ironic that after all your efforts to erase my family, I've delivered myself to your doorstep." The court held its breath. Men had died for lesser insults, but curiosity stirred within me, a sensation I had almost forgotten. "Why have you come, Prince Dorian? To assassinate me? To reclaim your family's throne?" "Neither," he answered, straightening his shoulders despite the chains. "I've come to offer you something no one else can." "And what might that be?" His eyes gleamed in the torchlight. "Knowledge. About the rebellion forming in the east. About the foreign powers planning to move against you. Information your spies haven't been able to uncover." My advisors shifted uncomfortably around me. We had indeed received troubling reports from the eastern provinces, but nothing concrete enough to act upon. "And why would you betray your allies?" I asked, circling him like a predator. "Surely they fight in your name." "They fight for themselves," he countered, using my family's banner as a convenient symbol. "I have no love for those who would use me as a puppet." "Interesting." I stopped before him, bending slightly to better study his face. Up close, I could see the fine scars marking his skin. the weariness behind his defiance. You expect me to believe you'd betray those loyal to your family? Out of what? Spite? His smile morphed into a dangerous curve of his lips. Let's call it pragmatism. I recognize power when I see it, Witch Queen. Something stirred within me, a feeling long dormant. Not just curiosity now, but interest. This fallen prince was unlike any man who had stood before my throne. Take him to the Eastern Tower, I commanded finally. Guard him well, but see he's treated as befits his station. I'll speak with him again tomorrow. As the guards led him away, he glanced back over his shoulder, that infuriating smile still playing on his lips. That night, for the first time since claiming the throne, sleep eluded me. His laughter echoed in my mind, taunting me with its fearlessness. Morning light streamed through stained glass as I entered the Eastern Tower. Dorian stood at the window, hands clasped behind his back, no longer in chains but still a prisoner. He turned at my approach, bowing with exaggerated courtesy. Your Majesty honors me with a personal visit. I gestured for the guards to leave us, ignoring their concerned glances. You claim to have information about my enemies, I said without preamble. Speak it. Without assurances of my safety. That would be poor negotiation on my part. I moved closer, allowing magic to crackle visibly in the air around us. Your safety? You stand in the lair of the witch who overthrew your family, and you speak of safety? Yet I still breathe, he observed. You're curious, Selene. May I call you Selene? Or do you prefer Your Majesty, or perhaps Usurper? My hand shot out, magic wrapping around his throat, not squeezing, merely holding. A warning. You may call me Your Majesty until I decide whether you live past sunset, I hissed. To my frustration, his eyes didn't widen with fear. Instead, they darkened with something else entirely. As you wish, he whispered against the magical bonds. Your Majesty. I released him, stepping back. Tell me of this rebellion. Rubbing his throat, he moved to a small table where a map of my kingdom lay spread out. They gather here, in the shadow of the Blackthorn Mountains, led by Lord Carew, once my father's general, now styling himself as my regent. Carew lives. This was indeed news. The old general had been among the first to flee when my forces took the capital. Very much so, and he's allied with Queen Alicia of Viridia. Now that gave me pause. Viridia was our nearest neighbor, a kingdom rich in resources but traditionally cautious in matters of war. Alicia has always been neutral in Lunarian affairs. Until you took the throne, Dorian said, tracing his finger along the border between our kingdoms. A witch queen with unprecedented power makes neighboring monarchs nervous. He wasn't wrong. Since claiming the crown, I'd received nothing but cold diplomacy from our neighbors. How do I know you're not feeding me false information to protect your allies? Dorian's expression hardened. Because Carew killed my brother when he refused to be their figurehead. Because they don't fight for Lunaria's people, only for power. And because... He hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his features. Because? I prompted. Because I've seen what happens to kingdoms torn apart by endless power struggles. The common people suffer while nobles play their games. If Lunaria must have a ruler, better one strong enough to maintain peace. His words rang with sincerity, surprising me. This was not the entitled prince I had expected. You'd accept a witch on your family's throne? The woman who destroyed your birthright? He met my gaze unflinchingly. I accept reality, Your Majesty. You won the crown through strength. That's how monarchies have always changed hands, beneath all the pomp and ceremony. I circled him slowly, considering. If what you say is true, why not join their rebellion? Why come to me? Because they would use me, then discard me. You, at least, have been honest in your ambitions. I laughed at that. You find honesty in conquest? I find honesty in not pretending your power comes from divine right or bloodlines. His eyes followed me as I moved. You took what you wanted and make no apologies for it. There's integrity in that, however brutal. His words stirred something in me. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. You'll remain here, I decided. Under guard, but comfortable. I'll verify your information, if it proves true. You'll what? He challenged. Make me your pet prince? I stepped closer, my face inches from his. You said you recognize power, Dorian. How far does that recognition go? Would you serve the Witch Queen? His breath caught, and the air between us suddenly charged with more than just my magic. That depends, he murmured, on what service you require. Heat bloomed in my chest, desire and warning entwined. I stepped back, clearing my throat. We shall see. For now, you live another day. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Selene. I looked back, my eyebrow raised at his presumption. Thank you, he said simply. I didn't acknowledge his words, merely left him in his gilded cage. But as I descended the tower stairs, I realized my heart beat faster than it had in years. Days passed. Dorian's information proved accurate, troublingly so. My spies confirmed movement in the east, and diplomatic messages from Viridia grew increasingly cold. I visited him daily, ostensibly to extract more intelligence. Each day I told myself it was merely strategic. Each day, the lie grew thinner. On the 7th day, I found him standing at his window again, watching the sunset paint the city gold. He'd been given fresh clothing, fine but not opulent, and his hair was tied back, revealing the strong line of his jaw. Your information about Lord Carewe's movements was correct, I said, closing the door behind me. My scouts found their encampment exactly where you indicated. He turned, something like relief crossing his features. And nothing yet. I've increased patrols along the eastern border. Preparations are being made. War, then. I moved to stand beside him at the window. Perhaps. Unless I can find another solution. Such as... I glanced at him. A display of power sufficient to make them reconsider their choices. Ah, he said softly. Magic. It won me the throne. It may yet keep it. We stood in silence, watching the city below. I was acutely aware of his presence beside me, the warmth radiating from him, the subtle scent of sandalwood that clung to his skin. Why did you really come to me, Dorian? I asked finally. The truth this time. He was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer. I spent 3 years in exile, he said eventually, hiding, running, watching from afar as various nobles attempted to use my name for their gain. I saw the kingdom I loved torn between factions, none of whom cared for its people. He turned to face me. Then I saw what you built from the ashes. And what did I build in your eyes? Order, he said simply. Harsh at times, yes, but the streets are safe. The harvests are protected. Justice is available to common and noble alike. I hadn't expected this assessment, this approval, from the son of the king I'd deposed. You're an unusual prince, I observed. A smile touched his lips. And you're an unusual queen. Something shifted between us then. A boundary crossed without either of us moving. I should go, I said, suddenly uncomfortable with the warmth spreading through me. Must you? He asked, his voice low. We've barely discussed tomorrow's council meeting. I frowned. What do you know of tomorrow's council? Nothing specifically, he admitted. But court schedules are predictable, and tomorrow marks the first day of the harvest moon. Traditionally, that's when agricultural reports would be reviewed. I stared at him, impressed despite myself. You paid attention to such details as a prince? My father insisted we understand the workings of governance, not just its privileges. A shadow crossed his face, though I fear my brothers took less interest than I did. Without thinking, I reached out, my fingers brushing his arm in a gesture of comfort that startled us both. I pulled back quickly, but the damage was done. A current had passed between us, an acknowledgement of something neither of us had named. Tomorrow, I said, my voice not entirely steady, you will attend the council. His eyes widened. As what? As my advisor. The word felt insufficient, but it would serve for now. The court should grow accustomed to your presence. And if they object to a Blackwood at your table? I smiled, allowing a hint of my power to spark at my fingertips. They won't. Not twice. His answering smile made my heart trip in my chest. Dangerous, I thought. This feeling is dangerous. Until tomorrow, then, he said, bowing with genuine respect rather than mockery. I nodded and left before I could change my mind, before I could act on the impulse to stay, to explore whatever this tension between us might become. In my chambers that night, I paced restlessly, torn between desire and caution. Dorian Blackwood could be playing a longer game than I perceived. His charm, his seeming acceptance of my rule, it could all be an elaborate deception. Yet when I closed my eyes, I saw not schemes and betrayal, but the vulnerability in his gaze when he spoke of his kingdom, the respect in his voice when he acknowledged my strength. Foolish witch, I whispered to myself. You conquered a kingdom, but cannot master your own heart. The council meeting proceeded better than I'd dared hope. The lords and ladies were initially shocked when Dorian entered at my side, but they masked their reactions quickly. They had learned the price of open defiance. I seated him to my right, a position of honor that sent whispers through the court. Throughout the agricultural reports, he remained attentive, occasionally offering insights that revealed his deep knowledge of the kingdom's lands and resources. The southern provinces report drought, Minister Aldrich noted somberly. They request tax relief until the rains return. Before I could respond, Dorian spoke. The southern watershed includes the Silvermere. When I was a child, there were water wheels and irrigation systems that spread their bounty across 3 provinces. What happened to them? The council exchanged glances. Destroyed in the border conflicts 10 years ago, Lady Merrick finally answered. Rebuilding was deemed too costly. A mistake, Dorian said firmly. Those systems would have provided resilience against the current drought. I studied him, impressed by his practical focus. Can they be rebuilt? Yes, he replied. I studied the original designs in my youth. With proper resources, we could not only restore, but improve them. Then it shall be done, I declared. Minister Aldrich, allocate funds for the project. Lady Merrick, you will oversee it. I turned to Dorian. Prince Dorian will provide the necessary technical guidance. A ripple of surprise moved through the council at my use of his royal title. I had acknowledged his lineage publicly, a significant concession. As the meeting continued, I felt the council's wary acceptance of Dorian's presence evolve into genuine respect for his contributions. By the time we adjourned, several ministers were actively seeking his input. You impressed them, I told him as we walked the corridor afterward, guards trailing at a discreet distance. I merely offered what knowledge I have, he replied. It's your approval that gave my words weight. Don't underestimate yourself. They recognized your value. He stopped, turning to face me. "And what value do I have to you, Selene?" The question hung between us, laden with meaning beyond the political. In the quiet corridor, with afternoon light streaming through arched windows, I found myself unable to maintain the careful distance I'd imposed. "More than I anticipated," I admitted softly. Something kindled in his eyes. Hope, perhaps. Or triumph. Either could be dangerous. "Walk with me," I said suddenly. "There's something I wish to show you." I led him through rarely used passages until we reached a small door hidden behind a tapestry. With a wave of my hand and a whispered word, it unlocked. "Few know of this place," I explained, as we entered a circular room at the top of the eastern tower. Unlike the opulence of the palace, this space was austere but beautiful. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with tomes both ancient and new. A telescope pointed toward the sky through an opening in the domed ceiling. Plants grew in pots and hanging baskets, some mundane, others glowing with subtle magic. "My sanctuary," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "Where I practice the arts my kind were killed for." Dorian moved through the space with reverence, touching nothing but absorbing everything. "It's beautiful," he said finally. "You're not afraid?" He looked at me then, truly looked at me. Should I be? Most would be. Magic is still feared in Lunaria, despite my efforts to change that. "Fear comes from ignorance," he replied, approaching a shelf of glowing potions. "I always found it strange how our kingdom criminalized something so fundamental to the world." I watched him, puzzled. "You speak as though you never feared magic." A shadow crossed his face. "My mother was accused of witchcraft when I was 7, not because she possessed any power, but because she questioned the king's policies too loudly." His fingers traced the spine of a book. "I watched them drag her away. My father did nothing to stop it." Understanding dawned. "That's why you don't mourn the fall of your house." "I mourn what my family could have been, not what it was." He turned to me. "When you seized the throne, many called it a tragedy. I called it justice." The admission hung between us, reshaping everything I thought I knew about him. Not a prince seeking to reclaim his birthright, but a man whose wounds paralleled my own. "Justice," I echoed. "Is that what you seek from me?" He stepped close enough that I felt the heat of him and saw the faint scar above his eyebrow. "I seek many things from you, Selene. Justice is but one of them." My breath caught. We stood on a precipice, both knowing the next step would change everything. "Tell me what else you seek," I whispered. His hand rose slowly, giving me every chance to retreat, to maintain the barrier of queen and subject. When his fingers finally touched my cheek, the contact sent sparks through me that had nothing to do with magic. "This," he breathed, and then his lips were on mine. The kiss began gently, a question playing on his lips. But when I answered by drawing him closer, it transformed into something hungry, desperate, a culmination of tension that had been building since he first laughed in my throne room. My magic responded to my emotions, swirling around us in tendrils of silver light. Rather than pulling away in fear, Dorian drew me closer, his hands tangling in my hair as the kiss deepened. When we finally broke apart, breathless, the room sparkled with energy. "I should turn you to ash for such presumption," I said, but there was no threat in my voice. He smiled against my lips. "But you won't." "No," I admitted. "I won't." Later, as twilight descended, we sat together by the window of my sanctuary, his arm around me, my head resting against his shoulder. The vulnerability of the position should have terrified me. Instead, I found peace in it. "What happens now?" he asked, his fingers tracing patterns on my arm. I looked up at him, at the face that had somehow become precious to me in so short a time. Now we prepare. The threat from the east won't vanish because we wish it to. We, he repeated, testing the word. So I am truly your advisor now. I touched his face, letting my fingers trace the line of his jaw. You are more than that, Dorian Blackwood. Though what exactly? I'm not certain yet. He captured my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm. I can be patient, Witch Queen. I've waited this long to find you. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of council meetings, defensive preparations, and stolen moments in my sanctuary. Dorian moved from the eastern tower to chambers closer to mine, raising eyebrows throughout the court, but generating fewer whispers than I'd expected. Perhaps they saw what I was only beginning to admit to myself, that he balanced me and tempered my harsher instincts with his compassion, while supporting my strength without fear. But as our relationship deepened, so too did the threat from beyond our borders. Reports arrived daily of troops gathering, not just rebels now, but Viridian forces as well. Queen Alicia has officially denounced your rule, Minister Aldrich announced grimly in council. She claims your use of magic violates ancient treaties and threatens the safety of all neighboring kingdoms. Convenient, Dorian observed, that she only discovers this concern now when Lord Carew offers her a share of our eastern provinces in exchange for her support. I drummed my fingers on the table. How many forces does she commit? 5,000 troops, Captain Thorne replied. Combined with Carew's rebels, they outnumber our standing army 2-1. The council chamber fell silent, the gravity of our situation settling heavily upon us all. Then we must not meet them conventionally, I said finally. Lady Merrick leaned forward. You mean to use magic in warfare, Your Majesty? The kind not seen since the dark days? I met her gaze steadily. I mean to protect what I have built, by whatever means necessary. The cost would be high, Dorian said quietly beside me. Not just in lives, but in how the kingdom, how history, will remember your reign. I turned to him, surprised by his caution. Would you have me surrender the throne? Return to the days when those with magic were hunted? Never, he replied firmly. But there may be another way. He stood, moving to the map spread across the council table. What if we divided their forces, made them fight on 2 fronts? As he outlined his strategy, I watched him with growing admiration. His plan was bold but sound, using our knowledge of the terrain to separate Carew's rebels from their Viridian allies, then dealing with each separately through a combination of conventional tactics and targeted magical interventions. This could work, Captain Thorne admitted grudgingly, though it would require perfect timing. And it would spare many lives on both sides, Dorian added, his eyes finding mine. I nodded slowly. Prepare the army according to Prince Dorian's plan. We move in 3 days. As the council dispersed, I held Dorian back with a light touch on his arm. When we were alone, I faced him directly. You surprised me today, I said. I expected you to support a more definitive approach. He took my hands in his. I will always support your right to rule, Selene. But I've seen enough bloodshed to last several lifetimes. If we can achieve victory without massacre, isn't that preferable? Looking into his earnest face, I felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed me. This man, who had every reason to hate me, instead stood by my side, fighting not just for me, but for the well-being of the kingdom we both loved. When did a Blackwood become the voice of mercy in my court? I asked softly. Perhaps around the same time a witch became its greatest protector. He countered with a gentle smile. I reached up to touch his face, marveling at how completely he had transformed from prisoner To what? Advisor? Lover? Something more? Stay with me tonight, I whispered. His eyes darkened. Are you certain? The court already whispers. Let them whisper, I interrupted. I've never cowered from their judgment before. I won't start now. That night, in the privacy of my chambers, Dorian and I finally surrendered completely to the desire that had simmered between us for weeks. His touch was reverent, discovering the woman beneath the queen, the witch beneath the crown. And in his arms, I found something I'd never expected to find on the throne I'd taken through blood and fire. Acceptance. Belonging. Afterward, as moonlight bathed our entwined forms, I traced the scars that marked his body, testaments to his years in exile. If I could go back, I murmured, I would ensure you were never hurt. He caught my hand, bringing it to his lips. If you change the past, we might never have found one another. Some scars are worth bearing for the path they lead us down. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. When this conflict is over, what then? What do you mean? I hesitated, voicing the fear that had grown alongside my feelings for him. Will you stay? Once your name is cleared, once your right to walk freely in Lunaria is restored, will you still choose to stand beside a witch queen? Dorian shifted, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. Selene, he said, my name like a prayer on his lips. I would choose you in any life, under any circumstances, not because you're a queen, not despite your being a witch, but because you are exactly who you are. I kissed him then, pouring everything I couldn't yet say into the gesture. Later, as he slept beside me, I watched the rise and fall of his chest and made a silent vow. I would protect this man, this kingdom, this fragile happiness I had found, no matter the cost. Dawn broke on the day of battle with an ominous red sky. I stood on the palace balcony, watching as our forces marched eastward according to Dorian's plan. He would ride with them, a decision I'd fought against but eventually accepted. The troops needed to see a Blackwood fighting for the crown, not against it. You should be with the rear guard, I told him as he prepared to depart, adjusting the straps of his armor. Coordinating, not fighting on the front lines. He smiled, recognizing my words for what they were. Fear masked as a strategy. My place is where I can do the most good, he said gently. Just as yours is here, preparing your magical defenses. I frowned, brushing imaginary dust from his shoulder. If anything happens to you, it won't, he interrupted, catching my hand and bringing it to his lips. I have too much to return to. We parted with a kiss that held too much of a goodbye for my comfort. As I watched him ride away, leading a column of troops beneath my banner, a strange foreboding settled over me. Something about this day felt wrong, though I couldn't place what. Hours passed as I prepared in my sanctuary, gathering magical energies for the complex spells that would support our forces. According to our plan, I would remain in the palace, using scrying mirrors to monitor the battle and channel magic where needed. Not the brute force I'd use to claim the throne, but precise interventions to support Dorian's tactical plan. By midday, the first reports arrived. Our army had successfully split the enemy forces, drawing the Viridians into the northwestern valley, while engaging Karoo's rebels in the foothills. Everything proceeded according to plan. Too easily, perhaps. My suspicion grew as I watched through the scrying mirror. The Viridian forces seemed to offer less resistance than expected, almost as if... It's a trap, I breathed, suddenly understanding. They wanted us to split our forces. No sooner had I spoken than the mirror showed a new development, a third army emerging from the forest to the south, cutting off our troops from retreat. I recognized their banners with a chill. Mercenaries from the Western Isles, notorious for their brutal efficiency and complete lack of honor. I searched desperately through the mirror's images for Dorian, finally locating him in the thick of battle against Caru's forces. He fought brilliantly, his sword flashing in the sunlight as he led a charge against the rebel line. But he couldn't see the new threat approaching from behind. Without hesitation, I gathered my power, prepared to transport myself to the battlefield. A dangerous spell that would leave me vulnerable, but the only way to warn our forces in time. As the transportation spell formed around me, a messenger burst into my sanctuary. "Your Majesty, urgent news." I paused, the magic flickering around me. "Speak quickly." "A Viridian envoy has arrived under a flag of truce. He bears a message from Queen Elysia herself." "Now," I hissed, "in the midst of battle. He says they will withdraw all forces immediately upon one condition." Something cold settled in my stomach. What condition? The messenger swallowed hard. "The execution of Prince Dorian Blackwood, whom they claim has committed treason against both crowns." The magic around me dissipated as shock replaced urgency. Treason? What nonsense is this? "The envoy carries documents, Your Majesty. Letters bearing Prince Dorian's seal, detailing plans to overthrow both you and Queen Elysia, restoring his family's rule through a new alliance." "Impossible," I whispered. "I would have known." But would I? Had I been so blinded by feeling that I'd missed signs of betrayal? No, I refused to believe it. Not after all we'd shared, all we'd built together. "Bring me this envoy," I commanded. "I will hear these accusations directly." The Viridian diplomat was a sleek, silver-haired man whose calm demeanor belied the chaos his arrival had caused. He bowed with practiced grace as he entered my throne room. "Queen Selene," he greeted me. "I regret the circumstances of our meeting." "Show me these so-called letters," I demanded without preamble. He produced a leather folio, from which he extracted several documents bearing what did indeed appear to be Dorian's seal. I scanned them quickly, my horror growing with each line, detailed plans for using both my forces and Viridia's to weaken each other, creating an opening for a Blackwood restoration. "These are forgeries," I declared, though doubt gnawed at me. The handwriting was remarkably similar to Dorian's, the details of our defenses too accurate to be mere guesswork. "I understand your reluctance to believe, Your Majesty," the envoy said smoothly. "But consider, why would a Blackwood prince truly serve the witch who deposed his family? He has been playing a longer game, one that ends with your downfall." I turned away, struggling to maintain my composure. Through the windows, I could see the distant smoke of battle. Every moment I delayed here, our forces, Dorian included, faced that unexpected Third Army. "Queen Elysia offers peace," the envoy continued. "Immediate withdrawal of all her forces, an end to all hostilities, recognition of your rule. All she asks is justice for the man who betrayed both sovereigns." "And if I refuse?" His smile thinned. "Then the mercenaries from the Western Isles will complete their contract. I believe they are engaging your eastern flank as we speak." I closed my eyes, thinking rapidly. If I refused and transported myself to the battlefield as planned, I might save our forces. But at what cost to the kingdom? A prolonged war against 3 enemies would devastate Lunaria, leaving countless dead even if we eventually prevailed. If I accepted, "I need proof beyond these papers," I said finally. "Evidence that cannot be forged." The envoy nodded as if he'd anticipated this. "We thought you might say that." He snapped his fingers, and a guard entered bearing a small chest. Prince Dorian maintained a secret cache of documents in an abandoned watchtower near the border, the envoy explained as the chest was placed before me. one he visited regularly during his diplomatic missions for your crown. I frowned. Dorian had indeed undertaken several border inspections at my request. The chest bore his family crest, not a forgery, but an heirloom. With a whispered word, I checked for magical traps, then opened it. Inside lay more documents, maps of palace defenses, schedules of guard rotations, detailed notes on my magical abilities and their limitations. All in Dorian's unmistakable hand. Most damning of all was a small portrait, Dorian standing beside Queen Alicia, both smiling, their hands clasped in what appeared to be an alliance. When was this painted? I demanded, my voice hardly more than a whisper. 3 weeks ago, the envoy replied, during his last inspection of the eastern provinces. 3 weeks ago, when Dorian had claimed to be surveying our defenses, when he had returned to my bed with stories of troop movements and fortifications. Pain lanced through me, sharper than any blade. Had it all been lies? The tenderness in his touch, the vulnerability in his eyes when he spoke of his past, the passion in his kiss? Was it all merely the performance of a master manipulator? I thought of his laughter that first day in my throne room. Not fear, not respect, but amusement. The confidence of a man already certain of his victory. Your Majesty, Captain Thorne interrupted my thoughts, entering with a bow. The situation on the battlefield grows dire. We must have your decision. I looked back to the scrying mirror, where I could see our forces now struggling against enemies on multiple fronts. Dorian fought valiantly, rallying troops around him, playing his part to the very end, or fighting genuinely for the kingdom, for me, as he had claimed. Love me, and you will rule beside me. Betray me, and you will burn. I had spoken those words to him in the privacy of my chambers, a half-serious warning delivered between kisses. Now they echoed in my mind like a prophecy. The choice before me was impossible. Trust Dorian despite the evidence and risk my kingdom, or sacrifice him to save everything I'd built. Your Majesty, Captain Thorne prompted, we await your command. I straightened, my decision crystallizing with painful clarity. Tell the Viridian envoy I accept his terms, I said, my voice hollow. On the condition that Queen Alicia's forces withdraw immediately. The mercenaries must also stand down before... I swallowed hard. Before justice is delivered. Captain Thorne's eyes widened slightly. He had seen Dorian and me together and understood what this decision must cost me. But he bowed without comment. As preparations were made, I retreated to my sanctuary, unable to bear the sympathetic glances of my court. Through the scrying mirror, I watched as messengers rode to the battlefield, bearing white flags. Gradually, impossibly, the fighting ceased. I couldn't watch when they took Dorian. I turned away from the mirror, my fingers gripping the windowsill until my knuckles whitened. Behind me, the door opened softly. It's done, Your Majesty, Lady Merrick said quietly. Prince Dorian has been taken into custody. He asks to see you. I closed my eyes. Where is he? In the Eastern Tower, where you first confined him. How fitting. A circle was completed. I found him standing at the same window where I'd first truly spoken with him, though now heavy chains bound his wrists. He turned at my entrance, his face calm despite the guards flanking him. Leave us, I commanded. The guards hesitated, but a flicker of magic at my fingertips sent them retreating, closing the door behind them. For a long moment, we simply looked at one another. Is it true? I finally asked, my voice scarcely audible. Dorian's eyes never left mine. Which part? Any of it. All of it. I gestured helplessly. The letters, the meetings with Alicia, the plans to use me. No, he said firmly. None of it is true. I wanted desperately to believe him. They have documents, Dorian, in your hand, bearing your seal, maps of our defenses, notes on my magical weaknesses, a portrait of you with Alicia. Forgeries? He insisted. Skillful ones, but forgeries nonetheless. He moved toward me, chains clinking with each step. Selene, look at me. You know me. Would I betray you? After everything? I studied his face, the face that had become more precious to me than my crown, than my power, than perhaps my own life. No deception showed in those twilight eyes, only pain and pleading. The portrait. I've never met Queen Alicia, he interrupted. Never. Such an image could only be created through magic or exceptional artistic skill. Magic. Of course. The realization struck me like lightning. A composite, I breathed, created by someone with sufficient knowledge of both your appearances. Hope flickered across his features. Yes, exactly. My mind raced. But why? Why this elaborate deception to frame you specifically? Because I'm your weakness, he said softly. They couldn't defeat you militarily, couldn't match your magic, but they found the one way to make you defeat yourself. The truth of his words resonated with me. I had been manipulated, not by Dorian, but by our enemies. The envoy, I realized. He arrived precisely when our forces were most vulnerable, when I'd be forced to make an impossible choice with incomplete information. I moved closer to him, my hands rising to cup his face. I almost sacrificed you. But you haven't yet, he whispered, and now you know the truth. I pressed my forehead to his. I'm sorry I doubted you, even for a moment. I would have doubted too, he admitted. The evidence was designed to be overwhelming. The immediacy of our situation crashed back upon me. The envoy expects me to execute you. The peace treaty depends on it. A grim smile touched his lips. Then it seems we need a better plan. As twilight fell, the palace courtyard filled with solemn witnesses. A platform had been erected, black-draped and ominous. The Viridian envoy stood at its edge, his silver hair gleaming in the torchlight. I ascended the steps slowly, my morning gown sweeping behind me. The crowd fell silent as I took my place. Bring forth the prisoner, I commanded, my voice carrying across the courtyard. Guards led Dorian forward, still in chains. His head was held high, his gaze locked with mine as he climbed the steps to stand before me. Dorian Blackwood, I began, the formal words bitter on my tongue. You have been found guilty of treason against the crown of Lunaria. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many had seen Dorian at my side these past weeks and had begun to accept, even embrace, his presence in court. The punishment for such treason is death, I continued. Do you have any final words? Dorian's eyes never left mine. Only that I have loved Lunaria and its queen with every breath I've drawn. I die loyal to both. The raw emotion in his voice was unmistakable. Around us, I sensed the crowd's uncertainty, their growing discomfort with the proceedings. I turned to the Viridian envoy. Your queen's terms have been met. The prisoner is prepared for execution. The envoy nodded, satisfied. Queen Alicia will honor her promise. Our forces have already withdrawn. Good, I said, turning back to Dorian. Then we may proceed. I stepped closer to him, raising my hands. Magic gathered around my fingertips, not the gentle silver light Dorian had grown accustomed to, but crackling red energy that spoke of death and destruction. For the crime of treason, I declared, I, Selene, Queen of Lunaria, sentence you. The courtyard held its breath. to witness the price of those who truly betrayed this kingdom. Before the envoy could react, I spun, directing my gathered power not at Dorian, but at the chest of evidence placed prominently on the platform. The magic struck like lightning, illuminating the complex enchantments woven into the documents inside. Enchantments designed to create perfect forgeries, to plant false memories, to deceive even the most careful eye. "Behold," I cried as the chest's contents burned with fire, revealing the spells hidden within. "The true treason, an attempt to manipulate your queen into executing an innocent man through magical deception." The crowd gasped. The envoy lunged forward, but found himself frozen in place by a flick of my wrist. "Search him," I commanded the guards. They found what our hasty investigation had led us to expect: a witch's charm hidden in his robes, reeking of forbidden magic. Not my magic, but the darker arts practiced in secret by those who publicly denounced all enchantment. "Hypocrisy," I announced, holding up the charm for all to see. "Queen Elysia condemns me as a witch while employing forbidden magic herself. She sought not justice but Lunaria's downfall, using Prince Dorian as a pawn in her game." I gestured, and Dorian's chains fell away. "Prince Dorian Blackwood is innocent of all charges. Moreover, he has proven himself Lunaria's most loyal defender, risking his life in battle while others plotted from the shadows." The crowd's mood shifted, confusion giving way to anger, not at Dorian or myself, but at the deception practiced upon them. "Return to your queen," I told the envoy as I released him from my magical hold. "Tell her that Lunaria is not fooled by her schemes. Tell her that we stand united, the Witch Queen and the Blackwood Prince. And should she move against us again, she will face the full force of our combined strength." As the envoy was led away, the crowd erupted in cheers. Dorian turned to me, his eyes shining with more than just the reflected torchlight. "That wasn't precisely the plan we discussed," he murmured, a smile tugging at his lips. I took his hand openly before our people. I improvised. Later, as we stood on the balcony overlooking the celebrating city, Dorian drew me into his arms. "You could have trusted the plan," he said softly. "The sleeping draft, the secret escape, the puppet funeral. It would have worked." I nestled against him, breathing in his familiar scent. "It would have meant giving you up, at least in the eyes of the kingdom. I found I couldn't bear that, not even as a ruse." His arms tightened around me. "So instead you risked everything on a public revelation." "I risked everything the moment I fell in love with you," I admitted, the words I had kept guarded finally spilling forth. "Today, I merely acknowledged what I've known for weeks." He pulled back slightly, surprise and joy illuminating his features. "Say it again." I smiled, raising my hand to trace the line of his jaw. "I love you, Dorian Blackwood. Against all reason, against all caution." His answering smile was radiant. "And I love you, Selene, my witch, my queen, my heart." When he kissed me, magic sparked around us unbidden, visible to the crowds below, who cheered even louder at this display. Let them see, I thought. Let them know that their queen had found not just power, but love. Spring came to Lunaria with unusual beauty that year. The fields bloomed earlier, the rains fell gentler, and the sun shone warmer. Whether from natural fortune or the happiness of a witch queen whose magic flowed through the land, none could say for certain. In the throne room, I received petitioners with Dorian at my side, no longer as an advisor but as an equal, his circle of office matching the crown upon my brow. The court had adapted quickly to our shared rule, finding that the balance we provided served the kingdom well. "The last petition, your majesties," the herald announced as an elderly woman approached the throne. She bowed creakily, then looked up with keen eyes. "I come not with a request, but with a gift, she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. For your upcoming nuptials. I felt Dorian's hand tighten on mine. Our wedding, scheduled for the summer solstice, had become the kingdom's most anticipated celebration. You honor us, Dorian replied warmly, though no gifts are necessary. The woman smiled, revealing she was perhaps not as old as she first appeared. This one is. From her sleeve, she withdrew a small crystalline vial. A rare potion brewed only once a century when the celestial alignment permits. I leaned forward, my magical senses tingling. What does it do? It binds souls, she said simply. Not in the way of common marriage, but deeper. What one feels, the other senses. What one suffers, the other shares. What one celebrates, the other enjoys. Her eyes twinkled. It is a great risk and a greater blessing. Murmurs spread through the court. Such magic was ancient, powerful, and dangerous in the wrong hands. Why offer this to us? I asked cautiously. The woman's gaze softened. Because Lunaria has suffered the divide between magic and mundane for too long. Your union heals an ancient wound. This potion ensures it can never be torn open again. I exchanged glances with Dorian, reading the question in his eyes. After all, we had endured, after the trust we had built. Was this final magic necessary? We will consider your gift with the gravity it deserves, Dorian told the woman diplomatically. She bowed again and retreated, leaving the vial on the steps before the throne. That night, in the privacy of our chambers, Dorian held the vial up to the moonlight, studying the iridescent liquid within. What do your magical senses tell you? He asked. I brushed my fingers over the crystal, feeling the power pulsing within. It's genuine. Ancient magic, powerful beyond anything I could create myself. I met his gaze. And potentially dangerous. If one of us were injured, the other would feel it, he finished. If one died, the other would never be whole again, I whispered. He set the vial down carefully. A literal interpretation of your vow. Love me and rule beside me, betray me and we both burn. I smiled faintly at the reminder. A vow made in a very different time. But still true, he said, taking my hands in his. Whatever you decide about this potion, know that I already consider myself bound to you in every way that matters. I studied his beloved face, thinking of all we had overcome. The fallen prince and the witch queen, unlikely allies, more unlikely lovers, now poised to reshape a kingdom together. We don't need magic to bind us, I said finally. We've forged our bond through trials greater than any spell could create. Relief softened his features. So we decline the gift? I picked up the vial, feeling its weight, symbolic and literal. We accept the sentiment behind it, but rely on what we've built ourselves. I set it aside. After all, the greatest magic I've ever known isn't in potions or spells. Oh, he inquired, pulling me close. And what might that be? I smiled up at him, the witch queen who had conquered a kingdom only to surrender her heart. This, I whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. Just this. As our lips met, silver light swirled around us, magic responding not to incantation or ritual, but simply to love, the most ancient and powerful force of all. In the years that followed, Lunaria would flourish under our joint rule. Magic would gradually return to the kingdom, not as something feared, but as a natural part of life. The Witch Queen and her prince consort would become legends, not for conquest or power, but for the love that had healed a divided realm. And sometimes, on nights when the moon hung full and the sky speckled with silver, I would stand on our balcony with Dorian's arms around me, and think of how differently things might have ended. How close we had come to tragedy. How narrowly we had averted it. "What are you thinking?" he would ask, his voice soft against my hair. And I would turn in his embrace, my witch's power glowing gently around us. "That some choices are worth burning for," I would reply. "But I'm glad we found another way."